I fear that the proposal of directly operating on Git objects and circumventing the file system might make Project Lisa much less appealing than it is right now. And the appeal of Project Lisa to me is that it operates on the Universal Data API for application, or generally Universal Data API, and it's the file system. And by circumventing the file system, that appeal is gone. I'm going to demonstrate the appeal of the Universal File System with 4 applications, but I'm going to start with 3 of them first. I have VS Code open here, I have Xcode open, and I have a Markdown editor open called Typora. In all 3, they operate on the file system by namely opening a file, this readme.markdown file in an exemplary repository. All 3 have the same file open. All 3 applications are unaware of each other and have no integration with each other, and yet I can use whatever application I want and it's compatible to the others. Let me show. Let's say I'm changing the text here. This repository showcases instead of demonstrates, and I'll look what happens here. Showcases in Xcode and showcases in Typora. This is something that doesn't exist in the browser yet. And not only doesn't it exist, people don't seem to realize the huge potential of working with files and directly working on top of the file system. Whatever application I use, if another application can read that file, they just work. Users can just choose the application they want, and they're compatible with each other. It's something that is great, and it makes CI/CD and everything else much easier because you just say, read that file. Now, the 4th application is Inling itself. Without being able, or without operating on the file system, Inling couldn't exist. Why not? Because I have the same repository open in the editor now, and we are reading those JSON files here. And this is now a very concrete use case where I'm unsure if writing to the Git objects is the correct approach. Because I have the repository open, and let's suppose that the Inling editor operates on the local file system as well. Because, heck, why should the Inling editor stream from the server if a developer has that repository locally? If I, as a developer, make a change in this file, I don't know, loading to demonstrates, and I press save, it should be automatically reflected in the Inling editor without me committing or pushing anything. Sure, in the future, we want to have real-time collaboration, but it's a lot of overhead if I can just use the local data I have. Will most users use local data? Hell no. Look at Google Docs. I just stream from the server. Now, here's a concrete problem though. If we were to directly operate on the Git objects, I, as a developer, I just changed something in this application. And if the Inling editor or Lisa itself doesn't obey to the file system as the universal API for data, that change might or might not be reflected in the Inling editor. And vice versa. If I change something here, and let's say this directly modifies the Git object, not the file itself, or it doesn't write back to the file, it will not be reflected in the IDE. We have that feature request already from users. They're like, hey, I want to edit my files locally. And it is something we should likely support. From the proposal, what I understand is, and it makes a lot of sense if you look at it in isolation, or even maybe after that video we have an enlightening moment where we think we can come up with something better. The way I look at it is that we have files, and we had those files since the beginning of computing. The first kind of generation of software wrote on top of files, and that means they're single player only because it's really hard, and that's what we're experiencing right now, to collaborate on files. What Git does is something that is pretty amazing. It just says, well, whatever application, just work with the data layer you already have. It's the file system. And we build a layer on top of that provides collaboration. Some applications, some modern applications like VS Code, they directly build Git into the application itself and makes the collaboration part better. But what this proposal signals to me, and I might be mistaken here, Shannon, is that you're proposing, oh, you know what? I observed that it might be way faster if we just get rid of the file system and operate directly on top of Git. Now the problem is, if we were to do that, architecturally it makes a lot of sense. We're taking out a layer. The problem I have is that it seems to me that we're taking out the layer that makes Project Lisa and Git itself appealing, because it just works with all the applications that are out there. What it signals to me is that the inline editor and VS Code, they both need to build on Project Lisa to effectively make Project Lisa and Git objects, or Lisa objects, the universal data API. This will not happen. We will not get the mass adoption if we're not compatible with what applications are using out there right now. And while making that graph, I actually had a flashback to the mother of all presentations of inline. And I wrote in here the observation that we have Git here, and then we have those services that build on top of Git, and actually the file system itself as well. And I argued, wait a sec, are files part of the next generation architecture, where we just leverage what has been there for 50 years, it just didn't arrive in the browser yet, and we combine the browser, the file system, and the version control layer to bring the collaboration to files, to enable what I just demonstrated, that whatever application you want to use, you can use it. And this is not only a benefit to users, I view it as you can build an entire ecosystem around the file type. If someone wants to integrate with, let's say, markdown files, they don't have to get API keys, they don't have to communicate to servers or whatever. They can just read and write the file. It's a very simple dogma. So I hope I clarified my concern. One thing I'd like to say here is, in an environment where we control the file system, namely the inline editor, for example, of course, cut out you can build a very performant file system which, so to say, directly communicates with the Git objects. There's nothing that prevents that, and that right now seems to be the blocker. That the editor, the browser context is too slow. Locally, we don't have an issue, but I strongly encourage us, and actually to make that maybe a design guideline. Lisa operates on files, not on Git objects. Sure, maybe it operates on Git objects and synchronizes back to the file system, but then it seems like we have the performance penalty again. And maybe this is something we just have to take for granted, because it enables so many other things. If you take away the file system, you have an arbitrary backend, right? You have you could say this is my Postgres database. You have an arbitrary backend, and then every application needs to integrate to that backend. We would lose a lot of. I think I made my point. And I hope I expressed my concern.